abortion is a blessing. Or I'm trying to think, I think next week we're doing abortion is justice. So how is abortion social justice? How does abortion provide justice for individuals? But each of these has a very different meaning and a very different like personal connotation. So abortion can be a blessing when every other form of healthcare in this country has failed an individual, and abortion is there to help them through their to help them in terminating a pregnancy. Abortion can be healing when someone was raped or someone was a victim of incest, and abortion can be healing through that way. Abortion is traditional because our generations before us have been performing abortions, and they have been reproductive champions in their own right. And so each of these things means a different kind of thing, and each of these things is something that we're focusing on as an organization to spread further to destigmatize abortion.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No.
Cool. I'll go on now to just kind of like a broad, general overview of what abortion looks like in New Mexico. So the first thing I want to talk about is this 1969 abortion law. So a little bit of backstory on this abortion law. In the 1960s, the West Coast and the East Coast were both passing very strict, very harsh abortion laws in response to responses from the Catholic Church, to the rise of abortion or pro-life, quote unquote, as like a conservative standing point. And so all these states are passing abortion laws, and it was slowly coming in. And as New Mexico started to realize that, they passed at the time a pretty progressive abortion ban. I'm not saying this is progressive now or it's good now. This is like a very bad ban, obviously, but at the time it was viewed as very progressive. So essentially what the abortion law says is that all abortion is banned except if someone receives written certification by members of a special hospital board under the case of a pregnancy would cause them physical or mental harm. The child will have physical or mental defects, which I don't like how that's worded. I feel that's what, and going back to like Margaret saying, like a very like eugenist kind of talking point, or if the pregnancy was resulted from rape or incest. And so at the time, like I said, this was viewed as something like very progressive, but it, you know, it was in effect for essentially 4 years, and then on the federal level, Roe v. Wade was passed. So Roe v. Wade, I'm sure we're all familiar with it, is a law that pretty much allows each state to kind of like jurisdict their own abortion laws as long as they are still offering abortion care to people in their state. So I think that when we think about this law, it's important to recognize that, yes, it is still on the books. Yes, it is in effect because of Roe v. Wade. But if Roe v. Wade is gutted or overturned by the Supreme Court, which is a very real possibility considering the makeup of the Supreme Court, then this abortion law will go into effect and abortion will essentially be illegal in New Mexico. So that's a very scary reality because we obviously do not want any healthcare to be illegal, especially abortion care where it's getting attack after attack per day. And so our coalition in RCRC is working on repealing this abortion law from the books so that even if something were to happen to Roe v. Wade, abortion can still be a safe place in New Mexico, or can still have a safe place in New Mexico. This ban, as I talked about, it requires anyone seeking an abortion to present their case in front of a panel of doctors to determine whether they can or can't access abortion care. And especially in 1969 and still now, like it's a very real thing to recognize that the majority of these doctors would be upper class white males. And we know that like that is, you know, our Black and brown and women and indigenous people are going to suffer marginally different access to healthcare than the upper white men who are deciding whether they deserve to have an abortion or not. So going a little bit back 2 years ago to the 2019 legislative session, as I talked about earlier, Respect New Mexico Women, which is a coalition of around 25 organizations, including RCRC, but also Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, Strong Families, Indigenous Women Rising, Santa Fe Now. There's just a ton of really awesome organizations in this coalition. They came together to support what at the time was House Bill 51, which was a bill to overturn the 1969 abortion ban. So this bill, literally the bill was like 2 sentences long, and it said, essentially, we want to remove this 1969 abortion ban from the books. The bill made it all the way to the Senate floor before it was ultimately defeated by 8 Democrats siding with Republicans. I also want to note that abortion was not the only progressive issue that was defeated in the legislature last year. We had gun control, Medicaid, environmental issues, so many different deemed progressive issues that were defeated by this 8 Democrats that sided with Republicans. So the abortion ban repeal did not pass last year. And if you're familiar with the legislative session, you know that every other year is a 60-day session, and then in the middle is the 30-day session. So in 2020, we had that 30-day session, and we tried really hard to get the governor to put it as a priority item, and it was a priority item for her, but it just didn't make it through in that such short of time because it's only those 30 days. So coming up to the legislative session in 2021, we are hoping to ensure that the repeal of that 1969 abortion bill happens. I don't want to say that like we're confident it's going to get passed, because if you are confident about any legislation, it's just going to not turn out well for you and something's going to happen. But I will say that several of the 8 Democrats and also several Republican senators lost their seat to some really awesome reproductive rights champions across the state. So we are looking at this 2021 session a little bit more optimistically and a little bit more excited for what the result can be. I also want to flag that we expect and hope that this abortion bill moves quickly, of course. Like, obviously, we want to protect abortion as quick and as easy as possible. But we also want to build up the social movement of abortion care around in New Mexico and really have conversations around destigmatizing abortion, what that looks like, have people be not afraid to talk about abortion and what abortion means to them. And so we're looking at this bill not just as a way to get rid of this 1969 abortion ban, but to also create a larger conversation of how we can open up conversations around abortion care. In the future, we need to expand abortion to make it more equitable across the board. So that includes, like I said, the Hyde Amendment that needs to not exist. People should be able to access abortion care on whatever type of healthcare insurance that they're on. We need to be certain that abortion is seen as an essential part of healthcare and that abortion is healthcare. There's a ton of different things, but right now we're focusing on that abortion ban repeal in this 2021 session, which we're super excited about. What questions do we have on that? Is there any questions, any comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does abortion care include like choices other than abortion? Like, do you advocate for that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that our coalition and us as an organization want an individual to make whatever choice is right for them. So as someone who has worked at Planned Parenthood, and I'm kind of familiar with like the healthcare side of Planned Parenthood, our providers go through a pretty lengthy conversation with a patient as to why they think abortion is best for them. Here are some other options other than abortion. Is anyone like coercing you or anything into having an abortion? And so we really strive for people being able to access whatever care they think is best for them. We by no means are saying that if you're pregnant and don't want to have a pregnancy, you need to get an abortion. Like, there's lots of other alternatives. And I think that you brought up a really good point there. But I also think that like when thinking of abortion, it's so stigmatized. There's so much negativity around the word abortion. And as organizations, we recognize that. and really want to put abortion at the forefront so people aren't scared to talk about it or think about it or to access an abortion or whatever that looks like.
Okay, and can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Does it include care after the abortion and like long-term things like that?
Yeah, so again, speaking from like my experience with Planned Parenthood, every provider should offers to an abortion care patient if they need guidancing, if they need counseling afterwards, what are some other community resources that they can contact, whether that's for financial needs or for housing needs or for healthcare needs. And so I think on behalf of like all abortion performing organizations in the state, that like there's a really clear consensus on just ensuring that each individual has the mobility and the self-assurance to do whatever they feel is right for them, and that no one should be coercing them into not having an abortion, and no one should be coercing them into having an abortion. They should do whatever they feel is right for the individual.
Thank you.
And also, one other thing is just in terms of like how we want to take action around this issue, I think maybe it would be good to pair like the repealing the abortion ban with like bills about housing or access to like healthcare broadly, education. I mean, obviously everything's connected to abortion in some way or another. So maybe picking like a few bills that are sort of like supplementary bills would be kind of cool to look at. Songtree, just to like kind of touch on your point about aftercare and like what do you do after you've decided or not decided to have an abortion? Like, what are the next steps?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I applaud you for making that connection and understanding all those intersections and all that stuff. Is there any other questions on this section? I just have this one last section and then my presentation is over. We're good? Okay, cool.
Questions about spiritual counseling, but I can wait until your next session, segment here.
Yeah, just say this at the end. That looks great. So this section is just kind of what are we doing as RCRC to ensure that this abortion ban repeal is passed publicly facing. So some of the ways that we are engaging our community is through writing postcards to legislators. We're uplifting some key moments throughout the campaign through social media, making phone calls and texting. And so I would really love, not only if you guys got involved, but even if like an organization, like maybe there's like a group postcard writing party, obviously virtually, but like, like a time where we can all write postcards or a time where we all make phone calls or something like that. And that's something I can talk with Clarissa a little bit more about and kind of like see what your guys' capacity is and what you guys are interested in and all that stuff. But these are just a few of the ways that we're getting involved. And then at the end here, I just put my information. So if you ever have to reach out to me, you can reach out to me through email or phone. I'm open to questions. I'm open to other presentations, just to have a conversation about abortion. This work that I'm doing and that RCRC is doing is really intentional in creating conversation around abortion and destigmatizing abortion. And so please do not be afraid to reach out with any questions or anything you have. But that was my presentation. Let me stop share. Is there any questions or comments or stories or anything that any of you want to talk about?
I had a quick question. Do you know if there's like what the bill that will be proposed this year is going to be called, or like if it wouldn't have a number yet, because I guess it hasn't been filed, or like, do you know when they might file it?
So from my understanding, they're going to file it early next week. And we have like a spot saved in the lower bill numbers to ensure that it's a priority for this session. I don't know the numbers. I don't know if anyone knows the number yet. And we probably won't know till that's filed early on in the week. There's been some discussion as to whether we're going to do a separate House bill and a separate Senate bill, or start it as a House bill and kind of do what we did in the 2019 session. Again, none of us are like 100% sure on that yet. That's kind of depending on our sponsors and what they think is the best road to take. But as soon as we figure that out, like we will obviously post that so people can be notified. So just like keep an eye on our socials there, kind of thing.
Could you send us or send me an email and I will disseminate it with who the sponsors are? Like when you are going to drop the bill, let us know, and then who the sponsors are and who are the other organizations in the coalition working on this, and, you know, maybe some contact information for them so that we can kind of just, you know, be in your circle, letting people know that we have a youth voice that wants to be heard and be included in whatever the coalition decides to do.
Yeah, no, I will for sure send you an email and keep you updated on all that stuff. But it's still like before session, so I don't know a lot of stuff either. And so it's just kind of like a day-by-day basis kind of thing.
Sure.
I did have another question about like messaging. So one of the things that we are working on here is we're also going to try to create like a messaging campaign on our social medias for various issues, this bill being one of them. And I guess one question is, are you okay with us like using some of your messaging, obviously giving you proper credit? And then also, I guess just, do you have any advice for like how to go? I'm not sure who does, like who, I'm sure your communications team like sort of built that or designed it, but do you have any sort of advice for us in like creating our own messaging campaigns?
Yeah, so you're totally right. I did not create the messaging portion. We have a really great comms director. Her name is Erika, and I can definitely put you guys in contact with her because she knows a lot more about like the whole messaging communication side than I do. As far as like using our messaging, of course, absolutely. Whether that's like sharing it or transitioning it into like your own format or whatever that is, like I love that idea, and I'm sure that our organization would love that idea. Because I think that these statements are really powerful and they can be really interpreted really well. So yeah, absolutely. Feel free to do that. As far as like creating a messaging campaign, I think that like one of the really important things to remember is that, okay, so like, it's no secret that like abortion can be a very heated issue, and like there is a lot of times like a lot of opposition. Like even if you put the hashtag abortion is healthcare on something, like it's not uncommon to get multiple comments saying whatever they will. And I think that like one of the things that we really practice at our organization is not contacting or responding to anti-abortion messaging and energy. So I think that like sometimes like you can get a comment and it's so easy to be like, well, here's this. And I just like being totally transparent, like abortion, anyone who works in the reproductive healthcare field, especially abortion providers or people who work on policy for abortion, they can be like stalked, harassed. And there's been instances where people have been killed over being abortion providers. And so I would not want to put any of your guys' safety or health at harm. And so I think that like, if posting that stuff, if you get that opposition, like kind of just let it slide and like block them or like don't respond or anything like that, because it can be a really heated discussion and like you don't know what these people can do sometimes. Like it can be a little scary. So that's like my only like messaging kind of tip. But also I am not a communications person, so I'm sure that Erika will give you much better tips than I can give you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and actually, and I would love to get in touch with Erika as well if possible.
Yeah, I will send like Clarissa an email and include her contact info and all that stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Of course. Sophia, maybe we can, anyone who wants to, we could do a quick little Zoom with her just to hear some tips and see some kind of examples of things that RCRC is going to use. So help us figure out where we're going to go with this. So Brady, go ahead, Songtree.
Okay. 2 questions is, do you know what resources are being provided to young people if they want to access an abortion or become more informed about that option? And then do you know if there's a organization or something that for lack of better words, like judges the quality of the doctors that perform them?
Yeah, so just to like preface, RCRC is not an abortion provider. Like our organization does not have a healthcare facility where we provide abortion care. So I can't fully speak on what like resources are being provided in clinics or like from clinics. That's not like part of the abortion world that I'm super a part of. I do know that like as an abortion fund and as like a nonprofit essentially, as well as other organizations in our coalition, that abortion care, that like when we go out tabling or when, I mean, obviously like a pre-COVID world, when we would go out like tabling or we would be speaking at events, like whatever that looked like, everyone always carries like a little pamphlet that's just like, here are the abortion clinics in New Mexico. Here's how you can access them. Here's like a couple tips on like what stage of the pregnancy you're at, that kind of thing. But I don't have that information on me, nor do I fully know like what the healthcare provider is doing. So I'm sorry that like that's not really a full answer. And as far as like a website like citing whether like the care quality of these abortion providers, I know that there's no like pro-choice or pro-access sites around that. There's plenty anti-abortion sites that will attack these providers. And we as organizations oftentimes try and keep our abortion providers kind of anonymous just because of the incredible like hate and stalking and violence that they can often receive from anti-abortion protesters. So I don't have like a specific like website to see who's good and who isn't good kind of thing. But I think that like we as abortion provider, or not RCRC, but like the coalition having 3 abortion providers, like care is super important and of the utmost like quality for these abortion providers. And I think that like abortion care is one of the most safest medical procedures that an individual could go through, and that none of our providers or doctors would ever put someone at risk or harm them purposefully or anything like that. I don't know if that fully answers your question. I'm so sorry if it doesn't. I'm just like not super involved in that like healthcare portion of it. But if you have any other like questions about like the healthcare side of stuff, like I would definitely recommend checking out like Southwestern Women's Options website, or even Planned Parenthood of New Mexico's website, and they can provide you with like a little bit more information as to what's best, or as to like a little bit more information as to for like fully determine how abortion care is like provided, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
I think those are great questions, because part of the messaging around aftercare could be like a super important message that really, I would say definitely generations before have not even wanted to talk about, because there's been so much stigma around abortion. So talking about that as healthcare could definitely help, you know,
Yeah, for sure.
Normalize that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like we also have to remind ourselves that like abortion care looks so differently for so many different types of people. So abortion can be something super joyous or super happy or super exciting for someone. And I think that like, as you talked about, like there's always been the stigma of like abortion is this like dark, negative, sad thing that people go through, and it's like trauma inducing. But like a lot of times it isn't that way. Like abortion can be a really amazing and exciting part of someone's life, or can be a really awesome stepping stone to achieving the next part of their dreams that they're going for, kind of thing. And so I think that reminding ourselves that abortion care looks so differently for so many different people is really important, and that there's like this issue is so complex, just as every other healthcare procedure is.
Last thing is I have an appointment at 2, so I gotta go, but I just wanted to say thank you for bringing this to us. I was thinking about it before I came, and I was like, I don't remember ever learning about abortion options other than being a little child and watching Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That is so crazy. And so thank you for your courage in speaking to different people about it.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and I appreciate you getting involved. And like, even as you said, like, though you were never fully taught like what resources and what options you had, like being able to realize that now and access that is very exciting. So thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Songtree. So I had a question about, you were talking about some of our neighbor states do not have the options we have. And there was one candidate running for Congress in CD3 who is anti-abortion. And his campaign manager told me that women fly here for third-term abortions. And I just didn't have any information on that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, totally. So this is just like one of those issues that a lot of people don't fully like have the knowledge to be talking on. And so again, reminder, I'm not a healthcare provider. I'm not in the like patient room performing an abortion. So I don't 100% know like every answer to every single question. But what I can discuss is that New Mexico doesn't have any week cutoff or term limit. So what I mean by that is, you know, if you think about like in 2019 and 2020, especially in like southern states, there was like 6-week cutoffs, there was 10-week cutoffs. And so there's these like really kind of like specific, like you can only have an abortion up to 6 weeks and 3 days or whatever that looks like. New Mexico does not have any of those laws. So what that means is that if someone who is in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy wants to have an abortion, really one of the only places in the United States that they can get a 3rd trimester abortion is in New Mexico because there is no week cutoff. I will say that of those 3rd trimester abortions, I believe they count for like less than 2% of all abortion care in general. And so these are like very extreme cases. Maybe the pregnancy has started affecting them physically, or maybe they found out that you know, like their pregnancy is not going to be successful and that they can either like deliver a stillborn or have a 3rd trimester abortion. And so a lot of these people are in super emotional, super difficult positions. And we do have an abortion care provider here who I believe goes up to 28 weeks. And that allows them to provide the full spectrum of abortion care, not depending on things like week or on how big the fetus is or all that stuff. And so that campaign manager is fully right in that abortion doesn't have like a term limit. There is like no week limit on abortion, but I also want to like understand that that is such a small percentage of abortion and something that so many people get caught up in and are like, well, you know, they just say like horrendous things about these 3rd trimester abortion procedures when a lot of times these people are in such complicated situations. And so New Mexico does offer these, but I would also like, if you're looking at this from like a messaging standpoint, I would really try and stay away from that just because people can like really just run with it. Like they will come up with the most like ridiculous kind of sayings around it. I hope that answers your question somewhat from my knowledge of that. Yeah.
It does, and I wasn't thinking of that for messaging. Just when somebody tells me something like that, that all of these rich ladies fly in from all over the country to have these elective 3rd trimester abortions, I was like, no, that's not true, because 3rd trimester abortions only happen in a very small percentage due to very serious concerns. And this person was like, no, these ladies are rich. They just do it because they don't want to have the babies. I was like, whoa, that idea is like so not true.
that's a very like unrealistic idea of what abortion care looks like for people. Like people are not just deciding to wait till like they are 24 weeks in to be like, oh, now I want an abortion. Like a lot of times it's just like a very like heartbreaking situation for people, and that's why they need that access, and people can't connect those two for some reason.
Yeah, I know somebody who had a third trimester abortion because her baby had a condition where the baby had no, well, the fetus had no brain, and also there were just other complications. It was a really difficult decision for that family to make. The person was married, and the whole family kind of got involved, and lots of people in the community knew about it, and the community really supported that because, you know, they didn't want that young woman to go through that, or the fetus to continue to develop in a way that wasn't life affirming, I guess, for those people who are, you know, consider themselves to be pro-life. The other question I had is about spiritual counseling, because you are part of the religious coalition. Is that, do you know about spiritual counseling kind of like outside of churches that may be available for people who, as part of their abortion care?
Yeah, so again, I'm gonna be totally honest, I don't know like any specific organizations. I do know that like there are a lot of different counseling places and guidance people who can talk to someone after having an abortion. And we obviously know that like religion can mean so many different things to so many different people. So we obviously like, I know that like RCRC, like if they have like someone who is Lutheran, like we have like a faith leader who can talk to them through them having an abortion through like that Lutheran perspective. I know that there's also like a lot of like indigenous like spiritual counseling where if someone identifies as indigenous and it like lives on tribal land, like what abortion can mean for them and their community. I don't know any specifics. I would, again, I think if you go to like Planned Parenthood or UNM, the University of New Mexico Center for Reproductive Health, if you go to either of those websites, like they can provide probably some more sources than I can at this moment. But I do know that like the aftercare process of abortion, again, looks so different for so many people. And if someone needs that guidance or counseling, they definitely have the option to speak to someone, whether that's according to their faith or maybe according to their like nationality or race or whatever that may be.
Okay. Sophie and Damien, do you guys have any more questions?
I have a question. So
Yeah.
this isn't about like necessarily abortion, but like pregnancy prevention.
Totally.
Do you know if there are any like blockades to access? Say like if someone does want to, a woman wants to get her tubes tied, or someone who identifies as they, them, or for I'm forgetting the term. I don't know why I'm blanking on it, but like if a male wants to get a surgery so that they can't have children. Just do you know if there are any blockades put in place to, or like say if they're on Medicare or Medicaid, they can't get it?
Yeah. So that's not an issue I'm like super 100% familiar with. I do know that as far as like someone with a uterus wanting to get their tubes tied, like I do know that I see, this is the thing, I don't know if they're still like, if it's still law or not, but I do know it's a thing that like a lot of times healthcare providers would be like, you have to have this many children or you have to be this old or like that kind of thing to require someone with a uterus to achieve that procedure. I want to say there's still law in the books that's like something to do around someone like having that procedure and not having kids or not being like a certain age or something like that. But I don't know 100% the specifics, nor do I know if there's like a coalition or like an organization that's working on that bill. That is something that I think that like we as an organization should look into. So I thank you for bringing that up, and I think that's something really important to think about. But I don't have like a full solid answer for your question. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Because the way I'm kind of looking at it is like, well, if we make it inaccessible, say if someone has Medicare or Medicaid, but they can't get it covered by their insurance, but then they come into the scenario, well, where they need an abortion but still can't get it, well, then we're just kind of forcing people to like go down certain
Yeah.
paths that they may not want. So thank you.
No, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Someone close to me wanted to have a tubal ligation when she was 20, and the provider she went to refused to perform it because she didn't have any children, and they said she was too young, that she would change her mind later. And that person is now in her 30s and she still has not changed her mind. So she's finally at an age where they're willing to perform the procedure. But I mean, to go for 10 years, knowing that you have a greater risk of becoming pregnant and then having to go through other procedures just because, you know, doctors have that ageist point of view. I mean, I kind of understand that in some way, that people my age and older think that all young people want to have babies, but we're seeing more and more evidence that that's not true. So I hope my generation can catch up and realize that young people can make serious decisions about their lives.
Yeah,
when they're
and it just boils down to the fact that the policy making and decision should never be in between a patient and their provider. Like, there should be a patient, if they are seeking a certain type of care and it's healthy and safe for them, there should be nothing that is restricting a provider from providing that care. And these laws that are like requiring people to wait till a certain age or have a certain amount of kids, or like even going back to like abortion, like being on like a certain week or like whatever that is, like those laws are so restrictive and they're so targeted to keep control over people's bodies. And I think that there should be no legal decision in between a patient and their provider making a safe and healthy choice for them.
Yeah, and actually along those lines, do you know of any other like bills or just efforts broadly that are happening to, I mean, of course, expand access to abortion, but also like access to every other form of reproductive health care?
Totally, yeah. So we, in 2019 legislative session, the Respecting Mexican Women Coalition worked on, I think it was House Bill 89, which was I think it was like contraceptive equity or something. And that ended up passing, which was super exciting. And pretty much what that bill allows, there's a couple different things. So like, one of the things is that if you are a person who's accessing birth control through a pharmacy, a lot of times pharmacies would only give it to you in that like month prescription. So if you live in a rural community or if you live on tribal lands where you don't have easy access to pharmacists, like you could be having to make like 2-hour drives back and forth every single month. And so the bill pretty much allowed pharmacists to provide up to, I forget if it's 6 or 12 months, but it's one of those two of birth control for anyone who is receiving it through a pharmacy. There's also in that bill, if you are under an insurance company here in New Mexico for healthcare, and say you go out and buy condoms, if you take a picture of the receipt, you can send it to your insurance provider and they will cover that for you, which is super awesome. So now essentially people can access condoms if they have an insurance provider, which it should be free, but again, that's like a different conversation. I do know that there was a comprehensive sex ed bill that was going through the Senate, and pretty much right now New Mexico has like really awesome standards and benchmarks for sex ed, but there's no enforcement in that. So people aren't, if you know, like especially in like these smaller towns and rural school districts, like where they can only afford or only have the resources to get faith-based sex education, no one is like checking them on that. No one is following up and like seeing like what that sex ed curriculum looks like. So that bill pretty much is just a monetary bill to enforce the sex ed standards that are already in New Mexico. And that didn't pass in the 2019 legislative session. I don't know if it's going to appear again in this legislative session. That was something that we worked on as Planned Parenthood, like by ourselves, not as part of a coalition. So maybe a contact at Planned Parenthood would know a little bit more than I do. But as far as like other reproductive health care bills, for this legislative session, I think the main one is that abortion bill, just because, you know, it's COVID, like we're doing this all virtually. I don't think anyone wants to like push themselves to a point where they're like, can't keep up with it. So we're focusing on that right now, but that's not to say another bill won't appear up or there are underlying issues in New Mexico still.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, just because a lot of my like personal experience is with like preventing abortion in the first place. And I had quite a handful of cousins growing up who just like did not like have the same access to the education part of it as I did. And obviously there are many consequences to that. Yeah.
No, for
That's a
sure.
really good point, Sophia. I know talking with my kids who are older than you all, but they said a lot of their peers had the attitude that if it happens, it happens, because they really didn't have access to what they needed, nor did they really have the education to help them understand that this was a life decision. Like, this is something at a different level that you could take seriously about your own health. Like, there's no point of view about that. It's all about the stigma and still very Catholic point of view on sex itself. So it's still, I think we are still very much in the dark in terms of just looking at reproductive health as health. You know, we still are assigning that to women's sexuality. And that's to me, one of the greatest barriers that we need to overcome is we are marginalizing that portion of healthcare by assigning it to only cisgender women. So that actually, you know, that's why I was so interested, Brady, in your messaging about, you know, that this is an issue that concerns everybody. It's not just cisgendered women. And it's not only our responsibility as cisgendered women to make sure that we don't get pregnant or that we are making these life decisions for ourselves. It's really, I think has been my point of view, is that way back millennia ago, this was a tribal decision whether the tribe could feed another child, could raise another child. And that's just because you got pregnant didn't mean you were going to have that child, because if there were no resources for that child, you know, then there were conversations. So I think it's so important to broaden our perspective and just, you know, our country has blamed women forever for having unwanted pregnancies. And it's that is the real oppression of what we're talking about is the way that we have diminutized this portion of healthcare to be an issue about women's sexuality and the need to control women.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well put. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you know, and it's okay if you don't, but do you know if the state's legislation or like regulation, quote unquote, on abortion supersedes, say, an indigenous community and their laws and their sovereignty?
You know, I don't know that answer. I should know that answer, but I don't. I think that if you want like someone who is kind of like an expert on that, I would reach out to Indigenous Women Rising. I can provide some contact info with you guys, like to get involved with one of their founders, but they are a New Mexico-based abortion fund that's specifically for Indigenous people and ensuring that like, you know, Indigenous people have the funds and the means to access abortion, as well as like how to navigate abortion through Indigenous communities and tribal lands. So I would refer to them on that. I don't want to like speak on behalf and like assume anything. So reach out to them. I will provide that information.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
Nope. I'm being called for lunch, but thank you so much for coming and giving that presentation, Brady. That was really awesome. Thank you.
Yay. I'm so glad you guys like. We will stay in contact, of course, and I will send Clarissa all my information, and you guys can have access to my information and all that stuff. But don't be afraid to reach out. I want to stay super involved. So thank you guys. I'm so excited.